Epilogue. People hurried like ants in the fields. They hefted bushels and scurried back to the village. The summer solstice drew nigh, so the new year approached. Inside the village, the river flowed, the mill's wheel turned, and life plodded on. It had even been quieter than usual these past seasons. A sergeant had arrived in the early spring. He'd ordered the construction of a palisade and had trained the growing militia. But by now he had already moved on to the next village to do the same thing. Donley and his father were aiding the mayor's brother in building River's Bridge's first inn. The decision to build one was a hasty response to the arrival of a dwarven caravan. There had only been 2 wagons in it, but the dwarves sold metals and tools. No one could explain why they came, but they promised to return, and so the inn sprang up on the riverside. Donley walked with a vice over the bridge. He often left his hand resting on the pommel of his sword just because he could. He felt like real military now. He glanced over at her. She blushed and looked away into the brown water. She'd never blushed at him before. Not until the start of their trial marriage, anyway. They still had most of the rest of a year to decide if this was right. Movement caught his eye. Through the gates, he could see a rider approaching over a fallow field. His eyes watered at the shining armor. A knight, a vice breathed. What next? It had to be a knight, even if the rider was a bit shorter than imagination usually provided. Dawn took a step forward, but she grabbed his arm. He shook his head. "It's my duty. I have to ask why he's here." "We'll go together." They met the knight at the town gate, where the stranger reined in the horse. Dawn craned his neck upward to look at the closed visor. His eyes slid over the knight's equipment. The mail was flawless, as far as he could tell, and the saddle was inlaid with multicolored embroidery that he was sure would make a vice cry. His gaze locked onto a sword hanging off the side of the saddle. The pommel was imprinted with the black rose on a yellow field, the Saxen crest. He choked. What happened to the owner of this sword, Sir Knight?" Laughter answered him. "I'm no knight, Dawn." Dare lifted off her helmet. "I just found a sword that fits me better." She patted an elvish sword tied to the other side of the saddle. "And this other one, too, but it's all wrapped up. You wouldn't believe it." "Dare?" Dawn's voice called from a distance. "You get off that horse right now!" A vice stamped her foot. The young woman nearly tackled Dare when she dismounted. The majestic helmet fell to the ground like a bucket. "You've been gone so long!" "You look so much older." Dawn blinked again, staring between Dare and her horse. "Where have you been?" She grinned. "You won't believe—" "Where's Kelin?" "With the dwarves." "Dwarves? So where have you been?" "Got tangled up with the elves." "Elves?" "And Kelin. There was this war." "War?" "Kelin, they don't exist." "Oh, yes, they do. And there were magic swords and crowns and enchanted castles and dragoon knights." "Dragoons?" a vice yelped. Dare nodded enthusiastically. "The elves are still celebrating, and it's been 3 seasons." "Where's Kelin?" Dawn asked again. "He went to the dwarves, to see their underground cities. I have a letter from him to his parents." She snatched her helmet up from the ground, lifted the reins of her horse, and started to guide him toward the village. She whirled around. "All right, the palisade was weird, but you're building an inn, and you, Dawn." She thrust a finger at him. "When did you start carrying a sword?" "I'm a corporal now, in our own militia." He grinned and patted his weapon. "I'm the best in town." "We'll have to match blades." She smirked. "We will. We'll see who is better now." She looked at him with an expression akin to a certain knight captain's. She raised an eyebrow. "Don't boast until you actually know how good you are." Dawn blinked and exchanged a glance with a vice. Dare smiled. "I learned that one the wrong way." She locked her eyes on the bridge and began to lead the horse again. "I want to see my family now, especially my father." She glanced at Riordan's sword tied to the saddle before saying farewell and heading off. She found Riordan in his wheat fields. Her father surveyed her as she approached. His voice was soft in wonder.
"How did you—"
He straightened his shoulders. "I delivered your letter." She grinned. But he was still staring.
"Whose service can outfit you with this?"
She shook her head. "I'm in no one's service."
"Then how did you afford such extravagant equipment?"
His eyes narrowed.
"That's elvish mail."
"And a sword, too. I brought yours back. I had to travel to a rotted-out castle in the Wildlands to find it."
"The Count and the King cannot afford such equipment without saving for decades."
"Lucky for me these were gifts, then." His jaw slipped open, and he shook his head.
"Who could possibly afford to gift you with those? And what could you have done to deserve it?"
"I'm not exactly certain, sir, but I think it's because I saved the elven kingdom." She missed seeing his expression. She looked at the ground, remembering the years she'd spent farming it. "The elves tell it better, and I know the bards are coming. They would have been here sooner, but they take their time composing the music. In doing anything, actually. It can be acutely frustrating at times."
"Elvish bards?"
Dare dug her hands into the embroidered saddle. "Yes. I got Kelin and myself caught in the middle of a war."
"What? There's been no war."
"It wasn't in Thaelith. It was in Indaleria." He stared. "But the bards will tell the story better. They'll even sing it, too." Riordan ran a hand over his face. Then he laughed.
"If anyone else had said these things, I would not have believed them. I want to hear your story from you, though."
She chuckled. "I'll go stable my horse and be inside then." She led her mount into the empty stall next to the old plow pony. She leaned on the wall and watched the small, bleary-eyed creature chewing his grain. She smiled as she remembered how she imagined the old pony had looked. A year ago, he was a royal war horse. But now, no matter how hard she tried, he was still an old, dumpy plow pony. This has been Crown of the Realm, All Things Impossible, Book 1. Written by D. Dalton. Narrated by Lauren Ezzo. Copyright 2009 to 2019 by Deborah Dalton. Production copyright by Deborah Dalton.